Sitting on the edge of his chair, looking out the kitchen window, John kept his hands clasped together, as he always did when the house became too quiet. Since turning 59, mornings seemed longer. John was a truck driver for a local company, responsible for regional deliveries. No long interstate trips. No grand stories. Just familiar routes, repeated roads, and strict schedules. Honest work that paid the bills and kept his mind occupied. He stood up slowly, feeling his knee complain. His body could still handle it, but it no longer hid the accumulated fatigue of decades of effort. He put on his simple shirt, worn jacket, and boots. Before leaving, he automatically glanced toward the bedroom. The door remained closed. There his wife had slept for more than 30 years. She had passed 2 years ago, after a brief and merciless illness. There was no time for long goodbyes. No promises. Just a hand squeeze, a weary look, and a silence that never left. John never took off his wedding ring. Not out of superstition, but because he still didn't know who he was without it. Before leaving, he put food in the dog's bowl and checked his phone. No missed calls. No new messages. The kids were busy with their own lives. He understood. He always told himself that. At work, John did everything on autopilot. He checked invoices, loaded boxes, drove through streets he knew with his eyes closed. He greeted coworkers with a brief nod. No one asked how he was doing, and he didn't offer an answer either. During his break, he sat inside the truck, eating a simple sandwich. He watched people passing by, laughing, talking on the phone, living. He felt something tighten in his chest. It wasn't envy, it was longing to feel part of something bigger than just keeping schedules. He thought about his grandchildren. 2 of them. A curious boy who liked to ask too many questions. A shy girl who hid behind her mother when he arrived. John loved them deeply, but always felt he arrived too late, too tired, too silent. At night, returning home, the routine repeated itself. Simple dinner. Television on just to break the silence. The dog lying at his feet. John sat on the sofa and grabbed a box of photos stored on the shelf. There was one in particular. She was smiling, sitting on the porch, with a coffee cup in her hands. Her hair tied up carelessly. A real smile, not rehearsed. The kind of smile that only appears when a person is comfortable with who's beside them. John felt his eyes burn. "I wasn't looking for anything," he murmured to no one. He wasn't seeking a new love. He wasn't thinking about starting over. He just wanted the days to hurt less. For the nights to be shorter. For the silence not to scream so loud. At that moment he didn't know. But life was still moving discreetly around him. And sometimes, love doesn't come when it's called. It comes when we're just trying to survive. John put away the photo, turned off the light, and went to sleep. Not knowing that soon, a simple encounter, too ordinary to seem important, would change everything. John always told himself he was okay. Not happy. Not complete. But functional. And for a man of almost 60 widowed, with paid bills and reasonable health, that already seemed sufficient. That week, however, something began to shift. It all started too simply to be noticed. It was an ordinary Tuesday. John had finished his last delivery early and decided to stop at a small neighborhood market where he sometimes went. Nothing special. An old place with narrow aisles and employees who knew their regular customers' names. As he slowly pushed the cart, he felt a different kind of tiredness. Not physical, emotional. As if carrying his own thoughts was becoming too heavy. That's when he heard a voice behind him. "Excuse me, could you reach that for me?" John turned by instinct. It was a woman his age, perhaps a little younger. Light hair tied simply, glasses hanging on the tip of her nose, holding a package in the cleaning products aisle. Nothing about her drew attention excessively. No striking makeup. No rehearsed smile. Just someone ordinary. "Of course," he replied, extending his hand. The touch was quick, casual, but something in him reacted. Not like passion. Not like desire. It was more like recognition. "Thank you," she said, smiling slightly. You're welcome. John pushed the card away, trying to ignore the strange discomfort in his chest. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't betraying his wife's memory. It was just the forgotten feeling of being seen. He paid for his groceries and left. In the parking lot, as he was putting the bags in the trunk, he heard the same voice again. "Hey, I think you dropped this." She was holding his crumpled shopping list. John smiled, not knowing exactly why. "Thank you. Seems like I'm getting too distracted." "It happens," she replied, "especially when your head is full." He nodded, surprised by the accuracy of the phrase. "I'm John." "Helena." That was it. No invitation. No phone exchange. Just two names tossed into the air, as if they meant nothing. But they did. That night at home, John realized something had cracked inside him. Not in a painful way. It was more like an old wall beginning to give way. He sat on the sofa, turned off the television, and stayed silent. He thought about his wife. He thought about the time he'd spent living on autopilot, believing that feeling less was a way to survive. He felt guilt. Yes. But he also felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: curiosity about the next day. In the days that followed, John began frequenting that market more often than necessary. He told himself it was for convenience, for the price, for the location. The third time, he found Helena again. "Seems like we're regular customers now," she commented with a discreet smile. "I guess so," he replied. They talked little. About the weather. About how the neighborhood had changed. They discovered they both lived alone. That they had adult children. That life had taken unexpected paths for both of them. John didn't mention yet that he was a widower. Not because he was hiding it, but because it still hurt to say out loud. Helena didn't force questions. And that somehow was what touched him most. At home, John began to notice things he'd ignored for years. The accumulated dust. The empty walls. The heavy silence. For the first time, not as shelter, but as absence. He wondered if he was still allowed to feel something new after so long. If love had an expiration date. If the heart aged along with the body. He thought about his children. What they would say. He thought about his grandchildren. He thought about his wife, and a tear rolled down without warning. "I still love you," he said quietly. "But I'm tired of living only with longing." The following week, when he met Helena again, it was she who broke the barrier. "Want to get coffee sometime?" No commitment. Just conversation. John hesitated. Fear appeared quickly. Fear of hurting someone. Fear of hurting himself. Fear of feeling too much. But something inside him, that forgotten part, answered before reason could. "I do," he said. "Yes. I do." Helena smiled. A calm smile. Mature. Without promises. John went home that night with a restless heart. It wasn't love. Not yet. It was something more fragile. And perhaps more important at that moment, possibility. And after 50, sometimes possibility is already a form of hope. He slept poorly. Thought too much. But for the first time in years, he woke up the next day with a feeling that something new was beginning, even though he still didn't know where it would lead. John arrived at the cafe 15 minutes before the agreed time. He sat near the window, adjusted his jacket on the back of the chair, and ordered a black coffee. His hands were restless. Not from youthful nervousness, he knew that well, but from something more subtle, the fear of no longer knowing how to be there. He hadn't been on a date in over 30 years. When Helena entered, John recognized her immediately. Not because she was dressed specially, she wasn't, but because the atmosphere seemed to change with her presence. She walked calmly, like someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. "Did I arrive too early?" she asked. "No," John replied. "I'm the one who arrived too early." She smiled and sat across from him. The beginning of the conversation was simple. Coffee. Weather. Work. Helena worked as a librarian in a public school, something John found curious and comforting. She spoke fondly of the silence of libraries, old books, children discovering stories for the first time. John talked about the truck, the routes, the feeling of always being in motion yet still inside. At one point, silence settled between them. It wasn't awkward, just real. Helena was the first to speak. "It's been 2 years since my husband died." John felt his chest tighten. "Mine too," he replied after a few seconds. They looked at each other with an understanding that words don't reach. There was no need for details. The pain was different for each one, but the territory was the same. "Sometimes," Helena continued, "I feel guilty for being here. Sitting, laughing, as if that erases everything that came before." John nodded. "Me too. But I think, maybe love doesn't erase. It just changes form." Helena gripped her cup tighter. "I'm not looking for someone to replace anyone," she said. "Just someone to walk beside, even if slowly." John felt something warm inside his chest. "Slow is all I know how to do now." They laughed. A contained laugh, almost shy. When they said goodbye, there was no kiss. Just a brief embrace. Respectful. Necessary. In the following days, they began seeing each other once a week. Sometimes for coffee. Sometimes for a short walk in the neighborhood park. They talked about children, grandchildren, old memories. They also talked about fears. John told her about his distant daughter, his son who called little, his grandson who was growing too fast. He talked about the feeling of having lived more to provide than to feel. Helena talked about the silent house, long nights, the fear of aging invisible. There were days when John almost canceled. Days when longing for his wife pressed too hard. But whenever he thought about giving up, he remembered how Helena listened to him, truly, without trying to fix him. One Sunday afternoon, John took his grandchildren to the park. Sitting on the bench, he watched the boy run and the girl swing carefully. He took a photo and, without thinking much, sent it to Helena. "My grandchildren." The reply came minutes later. "They look happy. You too." John looked at the screen. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had noticed that. That night, they talked on the phone for over an hour. Nothing deep. Nothing dramatic. Just company. And when they hung up, John realized something that scared and comforted him at the same time. He was beginning to feel again. Not like an impulsive young man, but like a man who learned that love doesn't need to be urgent to be intense. There was still fear. Still guilt. Still silent nights. But now, the silence was no longer empty. It was just a space where something new was, slowly, taking root. John realized he was changing through small details. He began waking up a few minutes before the alarm. He started making the bed, something he hadn't done since becoming a widower. He returned to cooking simple meals instead of just heating whatever was quickest. Small actions that together said something he was still afraid to admit. Helena was part of his days now. Not all of them. Not all the time. And that was precisely what made it all more real. They saw each other without rush, without demands. Sometimes twice a week, sometimes just once. Neither wanted to turn this into something bigger than they could sustain. Even so, John felt his heart race when he saw her name on his phone. One afternoon, Helena invited him to dinner at her house. "Nothing special," she said. "Just simple food. If you want." John said yes before fear had time to answer for him. He arrived with a cheap bottle of wine and still warm bread from the neighborhood bakery. Helena opened the door wearing a simple apron, her hair tied carelessly. The smell of home cooking made John swallow hard. "It's been a while since I cooked for someone," she commented. "It's been a while since someone cooked for me," he replied, sincere. During dinner, they talked about small things. A difficult student. A grumpy customer. An old movie they both liked. Laughter came easily. But at certain moments, silence appeared loaded with something deeper. After dessert, they sat on the sofa. John looked around. Her house was simple but alive. There were photos on the walls, scattered books, a carefully folded blanket. A home that had continued breathing, even after loss. Sometimes, John said, looking at his own hands, I feel like I'm betraying my wife's memory. Helena didn't pull away. Didn't try to convince him otherwise. I feel that too, she replied. But I think our spouses wouldn't want us to stay trapped in pain forever. John felt his eyes well up. I'm afraid to be happy again, he confessed. As if something bad has to happen afterward. Helena held his hand carefully. She didn't squeeze. Didn't pull. Happiness at this age doesn't shout, she said. It whispers. And it goes away if we don't listen. John took a deep breath. That simple touch made his heart beat faster than any kiss he'd received in recent years. In the following days, he began talking about Helena to his children. First cautiously, like someone testing the ground. I've been having coffee with a friend, he told his daughter on the phone. There was silence on the other end. And does it make you feel good? She asked. It does, he replied. It makes me feel alive. Then I'm happy for you, Dad. The words echoed in his head for hours. With his older grandson, it was simpler. Grandpa has a friend, John said as they walked in the park. Is she nice? The boy asked. John smiled. She is. The boy nodded, satisfied with the answer. But not everything was light. There was a night when John came home and felt loneliness hit hard again. He sat on the bed, held his old wedding ring, and cried like he hadn't cried in years. He cried for his wife. For the life they had. For the time that wouldn't return. He called Helena afterward. Sorry, he said. Today is difficult. I know, she replied. Do you want me to stay on the line with you? And she did. Without speaking. Just breathing on the other end. John realized that was love too. Not the impetuous love of youth. But the love that sustains, that respects the rhythm of pain. He still didn't know where this would lead. But for the first time since becoming a widower, John stopped asking himself if he deserved to be happy again. He began slowly to accept that maybe he could. John never believed much in fresh starts. For him, life was always more about continuing than starting something from scratch. After 50, then the idea of new seemed too distant, almost inappropriate. But gradually, he realized he wasn't restarting his life. He was just learning to inhabit it again. Time with Helena continued without grand promises. Without grandiose plans. They didn't talk about moving in together. Didn't talk about marriage. They talked about ordinary days. And that was enough. One Saturday morning, John woke early and went to pick up his grandchildren to spend the day with him. He prepared breakfast more carefully than usual. While the children ate, he caught himself smiling alone, observing that simple scene. Later, he took them to the park. Helena appeared a little later, at his invitation. Nothing official. Just a natural encounter, as life had been asking. She sat on the bench next to John, watching the children play. They look like you, she commented. I hope they don't inherit all my mistakes, he replied. Your mistakes brought you here, Helena said. So maybe they're not just mistakes. John thought about that for a moment. When his grandson ran to him, asking for help climbing on the playground equipment, John stood up without feeling the usual weight in his legs. Not because his body had rejuvenated, but because his heart was lighter. Later back home, after dropping the children off with their mother, John sat on the porch with Helena. The sun was beginning to set. The sky turned orange, calm, honest. I spent a long time thinking my story had already been told, John said. That everything that mattered had been left behind. Helena rested her head on his shoulder. Stories don't end when people grow old, she replied. They just become quieter. And deeper. John took a deep breath. There was no formal proposal. No dramatic declaration. Just a shared understanding that that simple moment, was enough. That night, when they said goodbye, John held Helena's face carefully and kissed her. A calm kiss. Unhurried. Without urgency. A kiss that didn't try to prove anything, just confirmed what was already there. Arriving home, John took off his old wedding ring and stored it in the drawer, along with photos and memories. Not as a goodbye, but as a gesture of respect for the past. He lay down and turned off the light. The silence was still there. But now, it wasn't empty. It was a space where life could continue happening. John didn't become rich, didn't change careers, didn't become another person. He continued being an ordinary man, a present grandfather, an imperfect father, an honest worker. The difference is that after 50, he learned something he'd never understood before. Love doesn't always come when it's called. Sometimes it comes when we stop searching and simply remain open.